month ago. Sometimes when you go through these things, you don't know how you're going to react, and maybe it was just a little bit too soon for him to be on television. I don't know. But my heart goes out to him and his family, and I hope that they get the justice that they want in this story. And whenever he wants to come back, he is welcome to come back anytime on CNN. So let's talk about this now. Keith, you heard him say that, he's not going to, they're not going to rest because they're upset about this. They think his brother unjustly killed. What did you think?
Well, I mean, obviously it's a very emotional situation right now for a lot of people involved. The Attorney General in California is now getting involved, Javier Becerra, in terms of the investigation. But this is a case that illustrates why it's so important to have the police on the side of the community. And Donald Trump, I hate to bring his name into it, but, we're on the national show. Donald Trump today, through his White House spokesman, Sarah Sanders, says this is a local issue. But this is a national issue that's affecting communities all across this country, and it's important that we have leadership from the top that demonstrates why policing must be considerate, responsible, and respectful of the people that they police.
Steve Cortes, I want to bring you in now, because at the White House briefing today, April Ryan asked Sarah Sanders what the president had to say about the shootings of Alton Sterling, about Stephon Clark, and she responded similar to what Keith said. Let's watch it and then we'll discuss.
Certainly a terrible incident. This is something that is a local matter, and that's something that we feel should be left up to the local authorities at this point. Certainly we want to make sure that all law enforcement is carrying out the letter of the law. The president's very supportive of law enforcement, but at the same time, in these specific cases, in these specific instances, those would be left up to local authorities to make that determination, and not something for the federal government to weigh into.
So the White House is calling the shooting of a black man a local matter. A lot of people were outraged by that. Are you?
Don, I'm not outraged by that because I do think this is a local matter, at least for now. We don't know all the facts in this case, and I don't want to comment on this case specifically, but I'll say more generally, what is a national issue is that we minorities, and particularly minority men, are being slaughtered in the streets, and it's not by cops, it's by each other. And in my hometown of Chicago, black on black crime is by far the preponderance of the crime, not cop on black or cop on civilian crime. For example, Don, to give you stats, in 2017, there were 3,500 people shot in the city of Chicago. 23 of them were shot by police.
Steve,
11 were killed by police.
Steve,
625 were killed by assailants.
Steve,
Almost
Don,
all of the dead, young black men. So focusing on supposedly cops picking on minorities is a red herring, and it, by the way, is missing the forest for the trees. Because
Steve,
do we have a problem in this country of violence?
Okay,
of course
Steve,
we do.
Can I just ask one question?
No.
You do realize, though, when African Americans kill other African Americans, or white people kill other white people, or anybody who's a civilian is engaged in a crime, typically the police are involved, they investigate, and somebody goes to jail. The problem is not just that there is crime taking place. Crime will take place for the eternity of our existence. But the problem is that there's no accountability when the crime takes place involving police officers. That's the issue here. It's not about black on black crime.
Okay.
It's about accountability.
No. To that point, too, let me give you another, let's talk stats instead of generalities. Another stat, according to the Chicago Tribune, which is an organization that's no fan of President Trump or Republicans or cops for that matter, they said that over a 6-year period, 2010 to 2016, half of the police shooters, half of them were either Hispanic or black. So there's not a systemic bias.
Steve, I don't want to waste, let's not waste time here. My question, Steve, was about how the White House responded. And you said that you think it's a local matter when these incidences are investigated by the federal government all the time. As a matter of fact, President Trump has weighed in on the murder of Kate Steinle, who happens to be white, and saying, oh, it was a horrible verdict. Kate Steinle, it was terrible. So why is the killing of an unarmed black man any different than that? Let's let Shermichael talk.
Look, Don,
no, listen, I'll tell you.
Can I continue?
Yeah, and then Steve can go in after. Go ahead.
Okay, thank you. Don, look, I would say, first of all, if I could just rebut some of Steve's statements. Number one, people typically will commit crimes against other individuals they live in close proximity to. So if you live around other African Americans and you're African Americans, then the logical thing would be to presume that you're going to commit crimes that impact other African Americans. The same thing for white Americans, number one. Number two, the president has spoken out on instances that play to his base, that play to his political agenda as it pertains to immigration. This is a national issue. There are African Americans across this country that do feel marginalized, that do feel targeted, and rightfully so. And I would ask the president, I would ask the press secretary, talk to some of your African American friends and ask them how they feel about this. Perhaps if the president spent some time visiting those communities, actually listening to the concerns of those individuals that he is supposed to also represent as the leader of the country, he would perhaps have a different idea of what people are going through, instead of saying this is just not a national issue, because it most certainly is. The country is divided, and it's further divided, Don, because of Donald Trump's rhetoric.
So I'm glad you brought up that issue of we normally commit crimes against people we're closest to. You're exactly right. And I'll tell you this, as an Hispanic American, one of the reasons that I'm so against illegal immigration and so against so-called sanctuary cities is because the victims of crimes by dangerous illegal aliens are normally Hispanics themselves. So Kate Steinle, you're right, Don, and I think there's too much focus on her. That was a horrible tragedy. But I'd like to talk about Sandra Duran in Los Angeles, a Hispanic mother who was also killed by a criminal illegal alien who was five times.
Steve, you're going down a rabbit hole. Hold on, stop. You're going down a rabbit hole. We're not here to discuss black on black crime. We're not here to discuss Hispanic on Hispanic crime. We're not here to discuss white on white crime. People who live in close proximity of each other kill each other, whether you're white, black, green, or purple. I'm talking about the president and I'm talking about the press secretary today saying that they couldn't weigh in on this particular issue because it's a local issue. Here's what the president said: a disgraceful verdict in the Kate Steinle case. No wonder the people of our country are so angry with illegal immigration. That certainly wasn't a local issue. The Kate Steinle killer came back and back over a weakly protected Obama border, always committing crimes, being violent, and so on. Build that wall. So then why is that something that can be weighed in on by the President of the United States, and it is not considered a local issue, but this one is? You don't see hypocrisy in that?
I don't, Donald. I'll tell you why. Because it's apples and oranges. And again, we don't know all the facts yet.
No, it's not. No, it's not. It's not apples and oranges, Steve. Steve, the fact of the matter is, right, the president is the president of the entire country. You don't pick and choose what things you want to talk about and what things you don't want to talk about. Stephen, wait a minute. The Constitution guarantees that all citizens should be able to have due process. That guy should have had due process.
Absolutely.
He should not have been shot 20 times.
Well, first they
said it was a crowbar. Then they said it was a gun. Then they finally said, oh, it was a cell phone. How do you confuse a cell phone from being a crowbar to a gun? There's something obviously wrong here, Stephen. It's okay to admit that, hey, we have a problem. We need to address this issue. You can admit that. It's okay.
Let him talk, Michael. Let him
hold on. Here's the difference. This may very well be a problem, and I'm not dismissing that. And again, we don't know enough, I don't think, about Sacramento to tell. It may very well be a problem, but here's the key difference, because you cannot equate the killer of Kate Steinle, who was an illegal immigrant, known criminal.
We're not equating the killer. You're missing the point. You are missing the entire point. You're missing the entire point. We're talking about the president of the United States giving
I give cops the benefit of the doubt, and so does the president.
And no. You're missing the point. The President of the United States is giving one story or one group of people attention while choosing not to give another group of people attention, each of them happening in a city in the United States of America.
Steve, can I tell you why this bothers me? Because when Donald Trump ran for office, he went to one black community and said that the previous administrations, Democrats had ignored them, and he wasn't going to do that. He was telling black people that they should vote for him because they had been betrayed by Democrats. And what have you got to lose? Then when he got elected, on Inauguration Day, he stood up there and he said that this American carnage ends right now and ends right here, speaking about the crime in this country. And now when there's a criminal case involving an African American who's a victim of a police shooting, he has nothing to say about it. There's an inconsistency in his behavior, and the president should know, the White House should know this is a national issue.
You know what he has done? You know what he has done for we black and brown Americans? He's delivered economic prosperity, something that
we're not talking about
Steve,
we're talking about police shootings. We can't deflect to their talking points every time we talk about
Well, I appreciate that Steve was going to pay tribute to the former President Barack Obama for lowering the unemployment
President Trump
rate.
has perhaps sustained it, but he hasn't done. I mean, come on, Steve, let's not be ridiculous,
listen,
man.
hold
on. He's sustained what Barack Obama did.
That's an important point, Don. You're wrong on that.
That's not what we're here to talk about.
The
disparity between minority and white household family wealth grew under President Obama, and that is a fact.
Okay.
Wealth disparity grew under President Obama between people of color and white Americans. It is now narrowing again.
We're talking about, we're talking about Stephon Clark, by the way, not employment or unemployment.
Thank you, Don.
So let's keep to the subject and whether this president treats
prosperity,
all Americans equally. We're not here to talk about any of that other stuff. That's a shiny thing that you want to use when you can't explain this administration's hypocrisy.
Don,
we'll continue our conversation on the other side of this break. Back now, Keith Boykin, Steve Cortes, and Shermichael Singleton, and we're talking about the issues in Washington and talking about Stephon Clark and whether or not this administration treats different people of different ethnicities equally or the same. Here's what the Congressional Black Caucus put out a statement in response to Sarah Sanders' response today. In part, they say, this White House continues to stun Americans with its ignorance concerning matters of racial justice. Injustice anywhere is injustice everywhere, and all Americans should be concerned about the epidemic of state-inflicted violence imposed on black bodies at the hands of some police officers. Unarmed black people are killed by police in enough states with enough frequency for this to be examined at the federal level. So, Steve, I'll ask this to you. Do you think the president is tone deaf in these issues? Is there anything that in his staff, does he have someone around him in his staff who can hip him or educate him on how hurtful some of the comments or his silence is?
Don, I think the default position of this president, he's been clear about this, and it's certainly my default position too, is in general, we default to the side of the cops, and we believe them. Now, that doesn't mean we always do, and it doesn't mean there aren't bad actors and bad apples among the police force, and at times they commit horrific crimes, and when they do, they should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law, and if they did in this case, that should be the result here. But that doesn't mean that we should somehow ignore, to me, the far bigger issue, which is not cop violence against minorities, it's minorities' violence upon each other.
What does that have to do with Stephon Clark? If you can explain to me what that has to do with Stephon Clark, who wasn't in a black-on-black, as you call it, standoff. He was shot. He was unarmed and shot by police. Or are you going to say the cop was black, or it's still a police issue? I don't understand why you keep bringing that up. It has nothing to do with this story. Absolutely nothing.
No, what I'm saying is, again, I'm not talking about the particulars of this case because we just don't know.
That's what we're talking about. That's what we're here to judge. That's why we invited you on to talk about this. We didn't invite you on to talk about that.
I don't understand why I don't understand, Don, why. Look, I get that we have to have opposing sides of the arguments. I'm a conservative. I get it. But I don't know why we bring people on these networks who say the most utterly ridiculous things, like everything Steve has said since we've just started this discussion. It is obvious. It is blatantly obvious that the president, the White House, has a difficult time discussing race. It's obvious. This president talked about murders of a white young lady from an illegal immigrant. Why? Because it suited his political agenda. When it comes to talking about black men being killed in this country, this president and his White House stays away from it. How many more African-American men have to be killed before we consider this an epidemic? We really need to begin to look at this.
Kevin, Listen, the epidemic is here. I'll be the first to say that. And what I guess I would turn this on you. Why? I mean, how many decades does the Democratic Party need to exploit minorities, whether they be Hispanics or blacks?
Steve, what are you talking? You're going back
and ask.
This has nothing
Kevin, this has nothing to do with what you're saying.
And secondly,
wait a minute, Don, if I could just reply to that,
Steve, you're talking to a fellow Republican, Sir Michael. You're not talking to me.
Kevin,
you're talking to a Republican who's saying this to you.
Sir Michael is a Republican. Go ahead, Sir
I
Michael.
could use your same analogy. You know, I was just reading a policy from Harvard a couple of weeks ago about poverty in rural areas. I could use your same analogy and say, why do poor whites continue to vote for Republicans when they've done nothing for them? If you want to use that analogy, let's get real. That has nothing to do with what we're discussing. The fact of the matter is, this guy was shot 20 times, and all he had was a cell phone. You cannot look in the camera and talk to millions of people who are watching this show right now and tell them that there is nothing wrong with that. Please tell me that is not what you're saying right now.
I am not for 1 second saying there's nothing wrong with that. And this may very well have been a cop acting very badly. But I will say this.
Say that.
My default position, generally, not in this case, generally, is to back the cop.
Why is that?
And I think
Why is that? Why is that?
We had. Why? Because we had a dangerous situation in this country under the previous president, where the cops were made into the predators largely in the public realm, and I think that was dangerous.
What's your evidence
not just
of
for
that?
them, but for public safety.
What is the
Part of my
evidence of that? What is your evidence of that?
Part of my evidence.
Violence happens
Again, I'll go back
everywhere.
to my.
Listen, and police officers have a very dangerous job, but that is a job they signed up for. Most police officers, I don't even have to say that, are good police officers, but there are some bad ones. Why do you always default to the side of the police officer instead of being equal and wondering what happened? Maybe this unarmed black man, maybe he's innocent, maybe he's guilty, who knows? Maybe the police officer's innocent, maybe the police officer's guilty. Why do you have to default to the cop's position? Isn't that the problem?
No, I'll tell you why. First of all, because all cops are not white, clearly. And the stat I cited in the last segment about in Chicago, half of police officers
what does that have to do with anything? Stop, Sir Michael, stop. So nobody mentioned anything about police officers being white. You just said that. What does that have to do with anything, Steve? I don't understand what's going on in your head.
What it has to do with, Don, it has to get to the idea that there's systemic racism within police, and I just don't believe that. And certainly I don't believe that in my hometown of Chicago.
Stop, Steve. There's systemic racism in every institution of society. The police are not immune from the rest of the biases that infiltrate the rest of society. The problem is that this attitude you have that Don pointed out, that you automatically default to accepting the police point of view, is not healthy, especially for African Americans like myself, who I'm targeted by the police. Even as an African American with a job and a degree, I'm still viewed as a threat to the police. Yes, there is racial discrimination. Every poll that's been conducted and every study that's conducted has demonstrated that discrimination as well. But the problem is that the President of the United States last year or earlier this year went out and told police officers to go rough up suspects, to hit them on the head and that kind of thing. That's not healthy behavior. And Don, we need better leadership.
Steve, I've got to go. I'm literally out of time, and I'm not ending because I don't want to hear what you have to say. I'm out of time, and I'm out of patience. Good night.